For hundreds of years, gambling has been a popular form of entertainment, or a scourge to society, depending on your point of view. It came to America with colonial settlers, with games of chance popular among wealthy elites and landowners, even becoming, such as in Jamestown, Virginia, an official source of revenue. It was not until the mid-18th century that gambling houses were challenged by moralists for being sinful in contaminating the mind and reducing the population to poverty and wretchedness. Gambling was made illegal and forced to relocate to safe havens such as New Orleans, or riverboats where the captain was the only law in force. Anti-gambling movements shut down lotteries once dominated by the social elite, but prohibition on legal betting forced it underground and created opportunities for illegal ways of gambling. The working class was served by hundreds of neighborhood gambling parlors featuring faro card games, and numerous policy shops where the poor could bet a few pennies on the daily numbers, and be quickly paid off so they could gamble again. The numbers game, or numbers racket, was an illegal form of gambling, played mostly in poor neighborhoods. Gamblers placed bets on numbers to be drawn randomly the next day, with a bookmaker at a tavern, bar, shop, social club, or any other semi-private place that acted as an illegal betting parlor. In 1875, a report of a select committee of the New York State Assembly stated that the lowest, meanest, worst form that gambling takes in the city of New York is what is known as policy playing. It is into this world of gambling in early 1850s New York that we journey today, with an eyewitness account by an American traveler on his first visit to Lower Manhattan. The city's 4th Ward was notorious for overcrowded tenements, where, in the 1800s, the working class and immigrants rented accommodation, often little more than a dirty room. Or worse still, paid by the night to sleep in a filthy flophouse. Many of these hovels, considered at the time to be dens of disease, could be found on Pearl Street. This street, originally named after the many oysters found on the shoreline of the East River and now in the city's financial district, was home to several famous and wealthy American merchants and industrialists. But it evidently had pockets of deprivation too. For our reporter, his interest sparked by the story of a desperate woman who gambles on the numbers game and loses, tells of the conditions to which her wretched vice brought her. Find out what it was like for a family to live in a miserable basement tenement on Pearl Street, and how addiction to gambling meant a life of rags, hunger, and, all too often, a short life, bereft of hope. Before we move on, if you're interested in history like this, and you want to find out more about what life was really like for people in the past, please consider subscribing for more content. If you'd like to support what we make for you, check out the description for links to ways you can help us to continue bringing the past alive. There is hardly a greater moral pestilence in New York than the fearful and widespread spirit of gambling, in its multifarious forms and phases. It leads to poverty, misery, disgrace, crime, and death. It begins at the present day almost in the cradle, and the gambler is found in high life and low, among the rich and the poor, in the circles of the young and the aged, the honourable and the despised. The influence of this practice is very much the same in every place and under all circumstances, whether money or property is at stake, and whether the winner gains little or much. Gambling is very much like intemperance, in many important particulars. The habit is seldom acquired at once, and when acquired, is almost as seldom attended with reformation. It poisons the mind, perverts the judgment, stifles the conscience, and sends to the bottomless abyss its deluded votaries. And as we can hardly expect to reclaim those who are far gone in this vice, we intend the few hints which we have to offer, mainly to warn the innocent to beware of the first step, and especially with parents we would plead with tears in behalf of their sons, for the fairest hopes and brightest prospects of many a mother have been sadly blasted by the utter ruin of a darling son or bosom companion in the dens of death to which the unwary resort. I rejoice to see some well-directed efforts made for the suppression of this monster vice, But as yet, all that has been done hardly amounts to a beginning. It is not a drop in the bucket. The heart-rending effects of gambling upon all classes, the extent to which it is carried, the frightful number and ruin of its victims, and the means and arts used every day and every night to draw into its dark and bottomless gulf new recruits of such as can be easily led on, step by step, as unsuspectingly as the lamb is led to the slaughter, presents an array of startling facts quite sufficient to demand united and determined action, and ought at once to enlist such a mighty anti-gambling association as shall move forward with redeeming power. The germ of gambling in our city may every day be seen in the streets. The beginning is on a small scale. The players are the boys, and the gambling table is the sidewalk. These uncared-for boys manage to get a few pennies by begging, stealing, or by some little service, they care not what, and then they are ready to commence operations and are eager to get a chance at a game. The excitement commences, and they gradually draw around them boys who are more respectable. Their favourite games are pitching coppers, throwing them up for heads, betting on marbles, etc. Now, coppers change hands rapidly, and on a small scale you can see developed all the passions of the veteran gambler. But young ambition soon takes a higher flight, and the aspiring youngster soon lands at the bowling saloon, takes a few lessons there, and mounts a step higher, and is found at the billiard table, where his expertness is marvellously developed, and his scruples of conscience pretty effectively muzzled. He is soon ready for the faro table. He has chosen his profession, finished his apprenticeship, embarked in his trade. His career becomes desperate and his destiny fixed. During all this time, his parents perhaps never suspect any danger, and when the fearful truth is revealed, a father's remonstrance or mother's tears will not avail to break up the confirmed habit and reclaim their ruined son. A very extensive gambling operation is carried on, to the disgrace of our city, and in violation of the laws of our state, in the traffic of lottery tickets. A few weeks since, says a writer, we were standing near the door of one of the most fashionable lottery offices in Ann Street. A woman, meanly clad with an infant in her arms, approached the office. The babe was screaming to the top of its voice, but the mother appeared wholly unconscious of its cries. Her face was flushed with the hope that she would hear of the success of her favourite numbers. But she was doomed to disappointment. On entering the office, she was told that the figures she had bet upon were unsuccessful. We never saw such a change of expression in so short a time. As she escaped the threshold of the office, her countenance was pallid. Her whole aspect bore the marks of deepest anguish. The cries of her child seemed to attract her notice, but every other emotion was swallowed up in her keen sense of the loss of her adventure. We were anxious to know her condition, and followed her home. It was in the basement of a miserable tenement in Pearl Street. She had 4 other children, the eldest of whom was not more than 8 years of age. They were almost naked. They had nothing to sleep on but one wretched straw bed, and a few old rags. Not a spark of fire was in the room. There was no food but a scant supply of cold fragments, furnished by a family that lived in the next room, and which they were devouring with the voracity of starving pigs. The mother we found on inquiry to be a hard-working woman, of temperate habits, and addicted to no vice but her fatal propensity for lottery gambling. The father was intemperate, and spent all his earnings for rum. What a wretched picture! What a gloomy prospect for these poor, helpless, innocent children, and what a sad example! This destitution leads not only to present distress, but to disease and premature death in generations to come. Want of sufficient food, and clothing, and pure air, too often produces a scrofulous constitution, which frequently leads to consumption, and this terrible disease, when once acquired, no matter how, becomes hereditary and sweeps off generation after generation. There is not only more gaming in all large towns than in rural districts, but more dissipation, more daring outrage, more crimes of almost every hue. Pretty conclusive evidence of this may be obtained by making an excursion through our prisons. Hence we keep our locks and keys and bolts and bars, watching for thieves and robbers, day and night. And with all these on the alert, and policemen to whistle, and dogs to bark, and prisons to hold the rogues, nothing is safe.